Alexandra Larsen bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood and iron, and stood very still at the edge of Lady Larsen's breakfast room. Stillness had become her most useful accomplishment. Stillness while the tea cooled in silver, and nobody thought to offer her a cup. Stillness while her stepmother's acquaintances, 3 ladies with plumes nodding over marmalade, and one curate who looked at his plate whenever voices sharpened, listened to Lady Larsen speak of household burdens with the weary sanctity of a martyr. "I assure you," Lady Larsen said, pausing delicately over a sugared apricot, "there is no trial like ingratitude under one's own roof. That plain, ungrateful girl might at least make herself useful without requiring direction every hour." No one asked which girl she meant. There was only one likely candidate. Alexandra kept her hands clasped before her and counted, as her father had taught her to do, when temper threatened judgment. Columns first, outrage second. 6 teaspoons, 4 cups. 2 unopened letters beside Lady Larsen's elbow, both addressed in Mr. Pettle's broad, clerkly hand. At 22, Alexandra had the sort of face that invited contradictory criticism. "Too fine and pale," said one aunt years ago, as though delicacy were vanity. "Too grave," said another, because her eyes did not sparkle at the proper moments. Too dark in hair and brow for the season's taste for powdered brightness and healthful bloom. Her hair, heavy as wet silk, refused every fashionable arrangement except by force and pins she could not afford to break. Since her father's death, she had gone from daughter of the house to its unpaid companion and useful object. Summoned to copy bills by candlelight, to mend lace she would never wear, to read aloud whenever Lady Larsen wished to seem literary before company. Lady Larsen dabbed her lip and sighed toward her guests. "She had every advantage while my dear husband lived, every indulgence. Books, music, lessons, no prudent family ought to lavish upon a girl who must some day marry. And now, sulks and silence." The curate coughed. One of the ladies, emboldened by safety, gave Alexandra a sympathetic half-smile that vanished as soon as Lady Larsen's gaze moved. Alexandra inclined her head, because defiance was costly, and there was no one left in the room willing to pay for it. Behind her stillness lay a private arithmetic of survival. She had discovered in the first raw months after the funeral that protest produced tears, tears produced accusations, and accusations produced punishments disguised as moral correction. So she had learned to fold her pride small and keep it where no hand could reach it. Her one inviolate possession was not jewellery. Those had gone piece by piece for expenses, nor even her mother's miniature, which Lady Larsen kept locked in the Chinese cabinet. It was an old calf-bound ledger in the library, her father's mercantile book, pages thick with inked totals and pencilled corrections in a hand she knew as she knew her own pulse. At 11 she had sat beside him at the green baize table, while he taught her sums, penmanship, and the stubborn principle that numbers did not bow to rank. "Dignity, Lex," he had said once, tapping the margin where she had blotted a figure and then corrected it cleanly, "is not noise, it is accuracy held under pressure." Now, when Lady Larsen sent her from table to table like a servant, Alexandra repeated that sentence silently until breathing became possible again. "Miss Larsen," Lady Larsen's tones snapped like thread pulled too tight, "you stand there as if carved. Pray carry these accounts to Mr. Baines after breakfast and remind him we require immediate payment on the Westgate lease. If you can remember 3 words in sequence." The ladies laughed because laughter was expected. Alexandra crossed the room, took the bundle of papers and said, "Yes, ma'am," in a voice so even it almost sounded indifferent. Lady Larsen watched her with narrowed satisfaction, as if disappointed not to have drawn visible pain. And do attempt not to look so tragic this evening at Lady Denshre's concert. Charity events are not funerals. Of course. Alexandra bowed and withdrew, closing the door on another peal of old, approving amusement. In the corridor she let herself lean once against the panelling, only once. Then she straightened, tucked the accounts under her arm, and walked to the back stairs where no one watched. Outside, February light lay thin and hard over the square. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 10. Alexandra went first to the steward as ordered, then, with the stolen quarter-hour Lady Larson would not miss, she slipped into the library. Dust motes turned in the shafted sun. She set down the accounts and opened her father's ledger to a page she had nearly worn smooth with revisiting. Receipts, disbursements, neat totals, his small cipher marks at the margins, practical miracles of order in a life that had become deliberate disorder. Her finger paused over one old line entry, half faded, never explained to her. Trust allocation, LAL, transferred under temporary guarantee. She had asked about it once in her 16th year, and her father had smiled distractedly and said, "For your future, you need not concern yourself yet." Yet had come and gone. The entry remained, mute as stone. From the hall came Lady Larson's bell, sharp and impatient. Alexandra shut the ledger, slid it back into its place, and returned to her day. By evening she had pressed her only cream muslin, mended one cuff from the inside so the repair would not show, and allowed the maid to drag her dark hair into a compromise with fashion. Lady Denshre's subscription concert was to benefit a hospital apprentice fund. Lady Larson went because all the right names would be present, and Alexandra went because refusing would have been interpreted as insolence. She told herself it was another room to endure, another set of eyes to avoid. She did not yet know that before the second sonata ended, endurance would no longer be an option. Lady Denshre's drawing-room glowed with waxlight and polished brass, the air crowded with perfume, damp wool, and the thin sweetness of orange peel set out in crystal bowls. Musicians occupied a raised dais at one end, bowing through Corelli while the audience talked over the quieter passages and applauded with calculated generosity at the loud ones. Footmen moved among clusters of satin and broadcloth like disciplined shadows. Alexandra stood near a marble side table with a subscription list in her hand, adding figures for Lady Denshre's secretary, while Lady Larson drifted from group to group, distributing smiles and grievances in equal measure. Across the room, men parted almost imperceptibly as the Duke of Ravensmere entered. Even before she saw him clearly, Alexandra felt the alteration in air. Ravensmere was not old, perhaps 35, but had the collected severity of someone who had long since ceased asking to be liked. Tall, dark-coated, impassive, with a scar whitening one temple, and eyes that seemed to measure distance rather than people. He was said to be cold, exacting, formidable in Parliament, merciless in estate matters, and wholly uninterested in drawing-room flirtation. He bowed to Lady Denshre, exchanged a few words with a bishop, and took up position by a pillar, as if he had been stationed there by tactical necessity. Alexandra looked away quickly. Men like him belonged to the same universe as coronets and war dispatches, visible, influential, irrelevant to her. The disruption began with something small, a metal clink, a raised voice near the card-room, then the sudden hush that passes through a gathering when scandal scent replaces candle smoke. A footman had come pale-faced to Lady Larson, bearing an empty velvet reticule and speaking too low for most to hear. Lady Larson listened, hand to throat, then widened her eyes with such credible distress that several ladies rose at once. "My sapphire clasp," she said, clear enough for half the room. "My late husband's gift! It was in this bag not 15 minutes ago." There followed inquiries, sympathetic exclamations, a suggestion to search quietly so as not to alarm the company, immediately contradicted by another suggestion that alarm was already complete. Alexandra took one involuntary step backward. She had seen the clasp earlier, bright blue against Lady Larson's glove, when she had fastened it for her in the carriage. She opened her mouth to say so, but Lady Larson was already turning, sorrow hardening into moral resolution. "I dislike naming suspicions," she said, "yet duty compels me. Miss Larson had charge of my things in the anteroom. She has lately been anxious regarding her prospects. I fear desperation may tempt even those we pity." For one stunned second, Alexandra heard nothing but the blood in her ears. Then sound returned in a rush. Gasps, the skitter of a chair, someone murmuring, "How dreadful!" She felt every gaze land at once, pinning her where she stood. "I did not take it," she said, and hated that her voice shook. Lady Larson gave a soft, broken laugh. "My dear child, if you have made a mistake, confess it now and spare yourself worse consequences. To bait a husband through theatrics." "That is false!" The words were out before caution could catch them. A few heads turned sharply. Contradiction from Alexandra was evidently as improper as theft. From near the doorway came the dry rustle of movement. The Duke of Ravensmere crossed the room without haste and without asking leave to intervene. He stopped at Alexandra's side, not touching her, but near enough that the angle of his body made a line no one else stepped across. "You are mistaken, Lady Larson," he said. His voice carried with terrifying ease, pitched neither high nor loud, yet heard from the musicians' dais to the far archway. The violins faltered into silence. "I saw Miss Larson place the sapphire clasp in your hand 20 minutes ago in the east corridor," he continued. "She did so while preventing one of Lady Densher's apprentices from falling backward onto the marble step. The boy would have struck his head if she had not caught him. You thanked her. I was 3 paces distant." No one spoke. Lady Larson's colour changed by degrees, rose then ash. Ravensmere looked toward the footman. "Search the lady's left glove. The clasp was there when she resumed conversation by the conservatory doors." The footman, trembling, obeyed. There was a tiny catch of cloth against metal, then a collective intake of breath as the sapphire winked in candlelight from exactly where he had said it would be. Lady Densher made a noise like dismay wrapped in etiquette. Someone muttered an apology to Alexandra. Someone else muttered that it had all been a misunderstanding. Lady Larson reached for composure and found enough to say, "In confusion one may misremember details, though no one now seemed eager to meet her eyes." Alexandra stood as if turned to salt. Relief did not come cleanly. It came tangled with humiliation, shock, and a fresh terror she could not yet name. The Duke had saved her from immediate disgrace, yes, but he had done it publicly, unmistakably, and against a titled widow skilled in social warfare. Nothing in Mayfair remained private once spoken aloud by a man like Ravensmere. He inclined his head to her, the briefest acknowledgment, and stepped back as though the matter were finished. It was not finished. It had only begun. By the following afternoon, 2 invitations had failed to arrive that Lady Larson had expected with noisy confidence. By the next morning, 3 more. On the 3rd day, a caricature appeared in one of the gossip sheets, a severe duke shielding a long-nosed spinster, while a jewelled matron shrieked behind a fan. The caption read, "Ravensmere's New Philanthropy." No names were printed, which was unnecessary. Everyone knew. Lady Larson raged in private and smiled in public, a combination Alexandra had learned to fear more than either alone. "You have made us ridiculous," she said at luncheon, stirring untouched soup. Men laugh when I enter. Women pity me. Do you understand what that costs?" "I did nothing," Alexandra answered quietly. "You accused me." Lady Larson's spoon struck porcelain. "Do not presume to remind me of my own difficulties." That evening Lady Larson sent for her to the blue sitting-room and dismissed the maid with unusual ceremony. Mr. Petal was already there, heavy-jowled, smelling of clove and stale port, his waistcoat straining over a prosperous stomach. He rose halfway and bowed, his eyes moving over Alexandra with the appraising confidence of a man examining collateral. "Miss Larson," he said, "charmed." Alexandra remained standing. "You wished to see me, ma'am?" Lady Larson folded her hands. "Mr. Petal has generously offered to resolve certain pressing obligations connected to this household. In return, he requests what any sensible gentleman requests, a wife who will be grateful for rescue." The room tilted, then steadied. Alexandra looked from one face to the other and felt the old stillness settle colder now. "I do not consent," Mr. Petal chuckled, as if indulging a child. "Affection often follows prudence." Lady Larson's smile thinned. "Consent is a romantic luxury, not a legal necessity when a guardian acts for a dependent. You have no dowry, no settled income, and, thanks to recent theatrics, no reputation to trade upon. You will repair the injury you caused." Alexandra felt heat rise, not from shame, but from the blunt falsehood of it. She was 22, her legal majority had begun last year, and no statute gave Lady Larson power to march her to church by decree. But law did not sit in this room. Money did. References did. A locked front door did. Lady Larson was not reciting legal truth. She was wielding ruin. "Injury," Alexandra said. "To whom?" "To me," Lady Larson snapped. "To this family. To every connection jeopardised because a duke found amusement in championing you." The name hung between them, volatile as spirits near flame. Ravensmere had not called, had not sent flowers, had not done anything that could be interpreted as pursuit. Yet his single intervention had been enough to contaminate every conversation with implication. A poor young woman publicly defended by an unmarried duke became, by social alchemy, either schemer or mistress in waiting. There was no third category. 2 days later, a card arrived from the Dowager Lady Ravensmere, written in a firm, slanted hand. Miss Larson was invited to reside for a time under her auntly protection, should circumstances at home become uncomfortable. The phrasing was precise, the meaning unmistakable. Legal shelter, respectability, distance from coercion. Alexandra read the note twice, then held it over the grate until the edge blackened. She did not burn it entirely. Some instinct preserved it, but neither did she answer at once. Charity from strangers, even honourable charity, felt perilously like surrender. To flee into the Duke's orbit now would confirm every whisper that she had engineered his notice. What was at risk had sharpened beyond comfort or pride. If she yielded, she would be tied for life to Mr. Petal, her person exchanged for debt relief like furniture. If she resisted without allies, Lady Larson could discredit her as unstable and ungrateful, and society would nod because it preferred familiar narratives to inconvenient truth. If she accepted Ravensmere's protection, she might keep her body and lose her name. In any direction, she seemed meant to disappear. That night, unable to sleep, Alexandra went to the library and lit one candle. The house creaked around her, full of expensive objects and inherited malice. She took down her father's ledger, opened to the old pages, and began to copy figures onto scrap paper with careful, disciplined strokes. Columns, she told herself. Outrage second. Somewhere beyond the windows, London laughed, speculated, and moved on to the next amusement. But in the pool of candlelight, numbers waited with patient indifference to gossip. If there remained any path that was hers, not bestowed, not bartered, not begged, it would be written there, in ink that did not care who had mocked her at breakfast, or who had defended her at a concert. By dawn, she had made a decision no one in the house would yet suspect. She would not marry Mr. Petal, and she would not vanish. Whatever it cost, she would learn where her father's accounts led, and whether truth, once spoken in the right room, might still matter. She sanded the fresh sheet, folded it once, and addressed it to Lady Ravensmere before courage could cool. Not acceptance, she could not yet bear that, but thanks, and a request she hoped was less dangerous. If her ladyship knew of respectable employment for a woman who could keep accounts and catalogue books, Miss Larson would be grateful for the name. She sealed it with plain wax, and sent it by the earliest errand boy before the household stirred. By 8 o'clock, Lady Larson was in her usual chair, composed and pearl grey, with Mr. Petal's latest letter placed where Alexandra could not fail to see it. The breakfast room smelled of coffee and impatience. "You look wan," Lady Larson observed. "If you are staging illness, spare us the performance. Mr. Petal dines on Thursday." "I shall not be at home Thursday." Lady Larson's cup paused midway to her mouth. "Indeed?" "I have accepted work," Alexandra said, "at the Denshire Charity School, cataloguing their donation library. I begin today." For a heartbeat there was silence, heavy and astonished. Then Lady Larson laughed, short and cutting. "Work? In public rooms, among clerks and ink and tradesmen's children. You would drag this family name through mud and call it independence. The name has survived worse this month." Lady Larson set down her cup carefully. "You will not go." Alexandra met her eyes for once without dropping her own. "I am of age. I will go." Something sharp flashed through Lady Larson's expression. Rage, then calculation. "As you please," she said, finally, with dangerous sweetness. "By all means make yourself useful. Whatever pitiful wages they offer will naturally be paid into this household, where your keep is still provided. Do not flatter yourself that employment relieves obligation." Alexandra said nothing. She had expected resistance. She had not expected permission. That meant a trap she had not yet located. By 9 she was in a hired hackney headed east, her father's ledger wrapped in brown paper in the bottom of her satchel, beneath worn gloves and 2 stale biscuits. She had not meant to bring it. She had brought it anyway. The Denshire Charity School occupied a long brick building behind the hospital kitchens, where the streets smelled of coal smoke, soap, and boiled cabbage. In the corridor outside the schoolroom, children recited verbs in uneven chorus, while a bell rang somewhere above. Miss Weatherby, the school's superintendent, was a narrow woman with practical boots and ink on her cuff. "You write a clear hand," she said, after scanning the sample Alexandra had copied. "Lady Denshire's secretary speaks well of your arithmetic. We have 8 crates of donated books and no order whatever. You will make one." She led Alexandra up to a cold room under the eaves where books stood in tottering stacks. Sermons without title pages, agricultural treatises, French grammars, poems, damaged atlases, 3 volumes of Blackstone, and 1 Greek lexicon large enough to ballast a ship. Dust lay thick as felt. To Alexandra it looked like possibility. All morning she sorted by subject, then by condition, making neat columns in a ruled notebook. Title, author, date, donor, if known, remarks. She mended torn labels with paste and stitched loose signatures where she could. No one interrupted her except a freckled boy who brought tea and stared as if uncertain whether ladies could belong in attic rooms. At noon, Miss Weatherby returned with a ledger and a metal cash box. "Your wages are 12 shillings weekly, paid monthly by the treasurer. Sign here." Alexandra signed. Miss Weatherby hesitated, then added, "There is one irregularity. Lady Larson called an hour ago to state that payment should be remitted to Larson House, as you are under her protection." Alexandra kept her pen steady by force. "I am not under legal wardship." Miss Weatherby's expression tightened with sympathy and self-preservation in equal measure. "I cannot arbitrate family disputes, Miss Larson. The Treasurer dislikes controversy. If you wish wages paid directly, bring written authority from your household solicitor." "Our household solicitor answers to Lady Larson," Alexandra thought. Out loud she said only, "Thank you for warning me." By the time she returned to Mayfair, her fingers were cracked from dust and paste, but her mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. Work, even compromised work, had given the day a shape Lady Larson could not entirely dictate. That illusion lasted until she entered the front hall. A footman handed her a card on a salver. The engraving was spare, severe, Ravensmere House. "His Grace requests the favour of a brief interview in the presence of Lady Ravensmere, concerning a matter touching your late father's settlements. No flourish, no ambiguity, no safe way to refuse." Lady Larson appeared in the doorway behind her, as if summoned by scent. "How industrious our scholar has been," she murmured, "and now a summons. You move quickly, Alexandra." "I did not solicit it. Of course not. Men simply cannot help themselves when confronted with meek eyes and martyrdom." Her smile sharpened. "You will decline immediately." Alexandra folded the card and put it in her pocket. "No!" For the first time in years, Lady Larson looked briefly uncertain. Over the next 4 days, difficulty multiplied with almost mathematical elegance. At the school, 2 committee ladies came to inspect the library and spoke over Alexandra as though she were furniture, until one said, not quietly enough, "Is this wise? I hear she is subject to nervous fancies. Such girls attach themselves to powerful gentlemen and then imagine slights everywhere." The other replied, "Lady Larson has borne it with Christian patience." Alexandra kept indexing folios with a hand that did not tremble until they had gone. On Wednesday, Miss Weatherby informed her that several donors had concerns regarding tone. By tone they meant scandal. By scandal they meant Alexandra. At home, Lady Larson began leaving physician pamphlets on hysteria in the morning room, where callers would notice them. She told one acquaintance within Alexandra's hearing that the poor girl had become fixated after a duke had mistaken common gratitude for significance. She instructed the butler to deny that Miss Larson received visitors. She accepted with magnanimous sighs condolences she had not earned. "Mr. Petal called twice and once intercepted Alexandra at the school gate, his cane planted like a barricade. "My dear," he said, showing tobacco-stained teeth, "this clerk's life cannot suit your nerves. Say yes now and spare yourself unpleasantness. I can be kind when obeyed." Alexandra stepped around him. "Then practice kindness at a distance, sir." He laughed and caught her sleeve. Before she could wrench free, a groom from a passing carriage dismounted, touched his hat, and said, "Miss Larson, Lady Ravensmere's compliments. Her carriage is at your service." Petal released her at once, glancing toward the crest on the carriage door. By the time Alexandra looked back, he was pretending interest in his watch chain. Inside the carriage sat not the dowager, but a sealed packet, and a note in the dowager's hand. "Come tomorrow at 11. You will not be received alone." That night Alexandra worked at her small table until the candle guttered. From the household accounts she still copied for Lady Larson, she extracted entries that had once seemed routine: fees to a clerk named Hollis, transfers marked temporary guarantee, sums paid to Petal and Crowle under vague headings like adjustment and consolidation. In her father's old ledger, similar words appeared years earlier beside the line that had never left her mind. Trust Allocation, LAL, transferred under temporary guarantee. The initials matched her own name exactly. There were differences too. Her father's numerals leaned right, precise and narrow. In later copied documents bearing his signature during his final illness, the sevens were crossed too heavily, the terminal flourish on the L blunt, where his had always lifted cleanly. Small things, perhaps, but small things had built the cage around her. Small things might pry it open. At 11 the next morning, Lady Ravensmere received her in a pale green morning room, smelling faintly of violets and sealing wax. The dowager was iron-backed, silver-haired and direct. "You are thinner," she said without preface. "Sit down and drink this. Ravensmere will join us when he has finished with my solicitor." So he had already begun, without asking, Alexandra thought, and discovered she was not certain whether that angered or relieved her. When he entered, he bowed first to his aunt, then to Alexandra, with the same reserve he had shown in Lady Denshir's drawing-room. Yet, close at hand, she could see fatigue around his eyes, as if he too had slept badly. "Miss Larson." "Your Grace," Lady Ravensmere set down her cup. "If either of you says, 'My dear child,' I shall ring for earplugs. Speak plainly." A flicker, almost amusement, touched Ravensmere's mouth and vanished. He withdrew a document from his case. "My aunt tells me you sought employment rather than refuge. That was sensible." He looked at Alexandra directly. "It was also anticipated. Lady Larson has informed several committees that you are unstable and in debt, and she has attempted to divert your wages lawfully payable to you. My solicitors can stop that, if you authorize them." "Why?" Alexandra asked before she could soften it. "Why involve yourself this far?" A beat of silence. "Because there are irregularities tied to your late father's settlements that intersect with a guarantee once issued under my state seal," he said. "I require clarity. So, I imagine, do you." Duty, then, not pity, not romance, something colder and more useful. She took from her satchel 3 copied pages and slid them across. "These are entries from my father's ledger and current household books. The same phrases recur. The figures do not—" Ravensmere read quickly, brow tightening. "Where is the original?" "Safe. May I see it?" "Not yet." His gaze lifted. "You do not trust me. I do not currently trust anyone who can ruin me by changing his mind." The dowager made a noise of approval behind her teacup. Ravensmere inclined his head, as if acknowledging a fair blow. "Very well, then trust arithmetic. Allow my man of business to compare these figures against registry filings at Doctors' Commons and the bank. If there is nothing, you lose nothing. If there is something—" "Then Lady Larson will not bury it," Alexandra finished. He held her eyes for a long second. "No." The breakthrough came in the library at Larson House 2 nights later, while rain tapped thinly at the windows and the servants argued in whispers over coal below stairs. Alexandra had spread papers across the green baize where her father once taught her to keep clean margins. On impulse, she pulled down an old school notebook from the shelf, a childish exercise book in which she had copied his cipher games at 13. Replace every third figure with the corresponding letter. Reverse columns by quarter. Totals reveal names concealed in trade manifests. She stared at the page, then at the ledger line, then back again, and felt her pulse kick hard. Using the old key, she reworked the temporary guarantee columns that had seemed meaningless for years. Beneath the stated amounts appeared a second message in disguised notation, brief and unmistakable. Trust settled for Alexandra Ann Larson at majority. Instrument lodged with Haldane. If illness persists, no alteration without child's consent. Her hand went cold. Haldane, her father's former clerk, long retired to Islington. She had thought him dead. She turned to later documents signed during her father's last month and applied the same key. The concealed text there was garbled, inconsistent, wrong cipher intervals, wrong terminal checks. Whoever had forged the visible signature had not known the hidden system. Forgery, not misfortune. Theft done slowly in sick-room silence. A knock sounded at the library door. Alexandra swept one sheet under the ledger, then cursed herself for reflexive fear. It was only a housemaid with a message. "Boy from Ravensmere House, miss." The note contained 6 lines. Haldane found. Statement taken under oath this evening. Signatures after June 14th. Not your father's. Funds redirected through Petal and Crowle under Lady Larson's instruction. One matter remains to be said in person. Tomorrow, noon. Lady Ravensmere present. Ah. By noon the next day, Alexandra sat again in the Dowager's morning room, ledger in her lap this time, no longer willing to pretend uncertainty. Rain had cleared. Sharp spring light made every edge look honest. Ravensmere came in carrying no papers. That alone unsettled her. "I have read Haldane's deposition to my aunt," he said. "She advised that I speak to you before council drafts terms." "Terms?" "A private settlement is possible," he said. "Restitution through trustees, quiet withdrawal of claims, no public proceedings unless breached. It would spare you spectacle. It would also spare half London embarrassment, protect men who had looked away, preserve a widow's social remnants, and bury the method by which a girl might be stripped and sold politely." Alexandra heard all of that in the word spare. "No," she said. Ravensmere did not argue. Instead, he stepped nearer, hands clasped behind his back, as if restraining them. "There is more," he said. "I owe you accuracy, as your father would have put it." The phrase struck deep and unexpected. "When I first saw your name in my solicitor's inquiries last month, it was attached to a dormant guarantee and disputed transfers. I was told there might be collusion from within your household or from you. At Lady Densher's, when Lady Larson accused you, I had already been watching for signs of manipulation." His jaw tightened once. "I crossed that room because what she said was false, and because my estate's seal had touched your case, not because I was gallant." Alexandra sat very still. She had asked for truth. Now truth stung exactly where vanity had tried, despite herself, to hope. He continued, voice lower. "Since then, every fact has cut one way only, and never toward you. Suspicion altered. Duty remained." A pause, and did not remain alone. The room was so quiet she could hear the clock in the hall. Lady Ravensmere, who had tact enough to rescue neither of them, rose and moved to the window, presenting a discreet profile to the garden. Alexandra looked down at the ledger on her knees, at her father's hand, at the columns that had outlived lies. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Then let us keep to accuracy. Lady Larson forged, coerced, and stole. Mr. Petal profited. Committees repeated what was useful. If we settle quietly, they lose money and keep power." Ravensmere's gaze held hers. "Public exposure will be brutal." "Silence has been brutal," she said. "Only quieter." A long moment passed, then he nodded once. Decisive. "As you choose." "No," Alexandra said, feeling something within her align for the first time in years. "As truth requires. I will not be sent away, and I will not be compensated into gratitude. We do this openly." Behind them, Lady Ravensmere turned from the window with unmistakable approval. "Excellent," she said. "At last a plan with teeth." "Then we begin today," Alexandra said. Lady Ravensmere rang for her secretary before either could object. "Subpoenas for the trustees. Notice to Petal and Crowle that any contract purporting to bind Miss Larson will be contested, and send for Mr. Finch. He has the only handwriting expert in London who is not a drunk or a peacock," Ravensmere added, "and a request to Sir Julian Markham to attend as neutral chair if a public assembly is called." "Sir Julian dislikes everybody equally," the Dowager said. "An excellent qualification." They worked for 2 hours at the escritoire. Lists, dates, names, the order in which documents must appear so denial could not leap ahead of proof. Alexandra spoke less than the others, but when she did, both listened. Twice she corrected an amount from memory. Once she caught that a transfer date predated her father's death by 6 weeks, and therefore could not belong with the forged group. Accuracy held under pressure. By 3 o'clock she left with copies in her satchel, and 2 of Ravensmere's men instructed to keep a discreet distance until she reached home. Discreet proved useless against Lady Larson's speed. When Alexandra entered Larson House, the butler met her in the hall with that strained politeness servants wore when ordered to be cruel. "My lady requests your immediate presence in the yellow drawing-room, miss. There are callers." Callers, at that hour, meant audience. The room held Lady Larson on the sofa in lavender silk, one physician Alexandra recognised from church dinners, and Mr. Petal seated squarely by the fire as if already master of the house. On the table beside them lay 3 pamphlets on female nervous disorders, arranged like evidence. Lady Larson clasped her hands with pained tenderness. "There you are, child. Dr. Mowbray has come out of Christian Concern. We are all so anxious." Alexandra remained by the door. "About what?" "Your agitation, your delusions regarding household accounts, your fixation on his Grace." Lady Larson lowered her eyes. "We hope rest may avert permanent injury." "Doctor," Mowbray cleared his throat, embarrassed and complicit. "Miss Larson, if you have experienced disturbed sleep, racing thoughts, an undue tendency to contradiction—" "I have experienced theft," Alexandra said. "And libel." Petal snorted. "Hear how she talks, wild as a pamphleteer." Lady Larson sighed. "You see, this is what I endure." Alexandra looked at the physician. "Did you examine me, sir?" He blinked. "No, but Lady Larson—" "Then you cannot diagnose me." She turned and walked out before permission could be denied. Behind her, Lady Larson's voice sharpened to steel. "Lock the library." By evening, the school sent a note that her services were paused until committee confidence could be restored. Her wages for the month, she was informed, had already been released to Larson House according to family instruction. At supper, no place was set for her in the dining room. At 10, as she sat in her bedchamber copying figures by candlelight, a stone struck the window pane. Startled, she lifted the sash. One of Ravensmere's grooms stood in the mews below, hat low. "Message from His Grace, miss. Urgent." She lowered a basket by cord. The groom tucked in a folded sheet and vanished before a footman could notice. "Tomorrow noon at Hanover Square," Ravensmere wrote. Lady Larson had petitioned to convene trustees immediately to protect family assets from malicious interference. Petal had secured proxies from 2 minor trustees already. If they carried the vote, they could ratify his claim, freeze disputed funds, and paint Alexandra's challenge as extortion before formal proceedings began. If Lady Larson succeeded, Alexandra would lose more than money. Publicly branded unstable and mercenary, she could be sidelined from her own case, her testimony discounted as spite, her father's name rewritten as negligent folly. Mr. Petal would hold lawful-looking papers enough to force years of litigation she could not afford. By the time truth emerged, if it emerged, she would be ruined past use. At the bottom, Ravensmere had written in his blunt hand, Bring every original you possess. Do not come alone." She read it twice, then hid it inside her stays. In the corridor, Lady Larson stepped past and paused outside her door, listening. The next morning began with theft. Alexandra went early to the library, intending to remove her father's ledger before the house fully woke. The door stood ajar. Inside, drawers gaped, papers lay strewn, and the shelf where the ledger belonged showed a clean rectangle in the dust. For one disbelieving second she simply stared. Then she searched everything: escritoire, cabinets, behind atlases, under the green baize, in the coal scuttle, in the waste grate. Nothing. She ran upstairs, checked her room, her satchel, the linen press where she had once hidden it during a dinner party years ago. Nothing. A maid carrying hot water nearly collided with her on the stairs. "Beg pardon, miss. My lady said no one was to enter the library after midnight. Mr. Crane took a bundle down to the furnace room." "Which bundle?" I don't know, miss. Books, perhaps." Alexandra was already moving. In the basement furnace room, ash still glowed under the morning's first coal. She took the poker and raked frantically through cinders while the scullery maid protested and coughed in soot. Charred paper lifted in black curls, useless at a touch. Near the back she found a half-burnt leather corner with a brass tack she recognised from the ledger's spine. She sat back on her heels, hands blackened, lungs tight as if the smoke had entered her blood. Lady Larson had not merely hidden it, she had destroyed it. By the time she reached the hall again, Ravensmere himself was there, mud on his boots, fury held so rigidly it looked like calm. "Your note said robbery," he said. "What's gone?" "My father's ledger." "Any copies?" "Some pages, yes. The cipher key is in my head. But the original—" Her voice failed once and steadied. "The original is ash." Ravensmere swore softly, a word she had never heard in a drawing-room. They went at once to Haldane's lodgings in Islington to salvage the other pillar of proof, the trust instrument her father had lodged there. A constable met them at the narrow door, hat in hand and face, already apologetic. "Fire in the back room before dawn, Your Grace. Small, but enough. Mr. Haldane was taken to St. Bartholomew's with smoke in his chest, not expected to live the day." Inside, wet plaster dripped. A desk had collapsed inward. Papers were pulp and grey flakes. The constable led them to what remained of a metal dispatch box, pried open with force. Empty. Ravensmere asked clipped questions: who arrived first, any footprints, any witnesses, and received shrugs wrapped in duty. A neighbour had seen 2 men before dawn, one with a cart, one with a lantern. That was all. 2 losses in 6 hours. Ledger burned. Instruments stolen. In the carriage back, Alexandra sat with her gloved hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. "I was foolish," she said at last. "I thought deciding for open exposure meant we had become difficult to crush. I forgot they have been practising." Ravensmere looked out the window, jaw set. "You were not foolish. You were late to a war already in motion." "At Hanover Square, what do I show them? Copies and memory? They will say I wrote both. They will call it invention, and perhaps they will be right to do so." His answer came after a beat. "Haldane's sworn deposition survives in duplicate at my solicitor's chambers. One witness who may be dead by sunset. He signed before 2 barristers and a clerk. And Lady Larson has a physician willing to call me hysterical." Ravensmere turned to her then. "If you wish to stop, we stop. We file quietly, recover what can be recovered in Chancery, and leave the carrion to feed on someone else." Alexandra closed her eyes briefly. For one aching moment she wanted exactly that. A locked door, silence, no assembly, no staring faces, waiting to classify her as victim or liar. But the image that rose was her father at the baize table, correcting a blot without anger, insisting that precision was its own defence. "If I stop now," she said, "she will use the same methods on the next girl with no witnesses at all." When she opened her eyes again, doubt remained, but it no longer commanded. "Then we go," she said. That night, in his study at Ravensmere House, the Duke finally allowed the door to close. Rain had started again, soft against the panes. On his desk lay 3 piles: legal notices, the copy of Haldane's deposition, and a caricature torn from a paper showing him as a raven perched on a money bag, while 2 women fought below. He had not laughed when his aunt sent it. He had not thrown it away. He poured brandy and did not drink it. He had told Alexandra the truth in the Dowager's morning room, but not all of it. Duty edged by suspicion had indeed put him in motion. Fear had kept him moving. Fear of repeating an older failure he had never confessed outside this house. At 24, he had trusted procedure over instinct and lost his sister for it. Eleanor had written him from her husband's estate, small, careful letters at first, then one frantic page smudged at the fold, saying accounts were altered, settlements vanished, servants dismissed. She was not allowed to receive callers without supervision. He had sent advice, not rescue. "Gather proof," he had written. "Avoid public scenes. Be prudent until Parliament rose and he could travel north himself." By the time he arrived, she was fevered after a winter confinement. Her husband charming before company and violent in private, every document arranged to make her complaints appear delusional. She died 3 weeks later. The inquest found domestic melancholy aggravated by weakness. The husband inherited. Ravensmere had not challenged the verdict publicly. Too little evidence, too much risk to the family name. He had done what great houses called sensible and what cowards called necessary. The scar at his temple came from a riding fall years later, but in memory it belonged to that winter, the crack in certainty where all his control had proved ornamental. A knock sounded. Lady Ravensmere entered without waiting, wrapped in a dark shawl. "You look as if you mean to duel the entire Court of Chancery," she said. "Could be quicker." She took the opposite chair and studied him. "You are blaming yourself for the ledger. I put men on her route and failed to guard her house. You cannot guard what a woman keeps under her own roof against another woman with keys." "She trusted me to move before they did." His aunt's expression softened by 1 degree. "No, she trusted you not to command her. There is a difference." He looked down at his untouched glass. "If this collapses, she will be devoured publicly for my interference." "If this collapses," Lady Ravensmere said, "it will be because liars had money and time, not because you spoke when you should have stayed silent. You tried silence once. How did that serve Eleanor?" He flinched barely, and she saw it. "Ah," she said quietly, "there she is." For a long moment neither spoke. Then Ravensmere set the brandy aside. "I do not know how to do this without harming her," he said, and the admission came rougher than he expected. "Every path through is lined with mud. If I stand too near, they call her kept. If I stand back, they call her abandoned." "Then stand where she asked you to stand," his aunt replied. "Behind when she speaks, beside when she is attacked. Never in front unless she cannot breathe." He gave a short, humourless laugh. "You make strategy sound like manners." "In this city it often is." She rose, touched his shoulder once, and went. He sat alone until the fire sank, listening to rain and the old unwelcome knowledge that power could fail at the exact moment it mattered most. By dawn, the final move had begun. A notice arrived at Ravensmere House and Larson House simultaneously. Trustees' Assembly, Hanover Square, 4 o'clock that afternoon, to ratify emergency management of Larson family assets and confirm a marriage settlement securing liabilities to Petal and Crowell. Attendance of Miss Alexandra Larson requested. In smaller script, almost an afterthought. In light of recent disturbances, medical certification of Miss Larson's capacity may be required. Attached to Alexandra's copy was a second paper, unsigned, in a hand she recognised as Lady Larson's clerk. If you appear and speak, I file statements by Dr. Mowbray and 3 servants that His Grace has kept you in clandestine correspondence and induced false accusations for gain. If you do not appear, the trustees will infer consent and proceed. Choose which ruin you prefer. Ravensmere read it once and handed it to his solicitor without comment. The solicitor went white. At Larson House, events moved faster still. Lady Larson announced at luncheon that Alexandra was unwell and confined to her room. The key turned on the outside. Alexandra waited until footsteps receded, then tested the windows. Too narrow to climb. Fireplace flue impossible. Bell pull disconnected. On the writing table lay clean paper, 1 pen and no ink, the sort of courtesy prisons called humane. For half an hour she paced, then forced herself to stop. Panic spent oxygen and produced nothing. Columns first. She removed from her sleeve the small folded scrap she had kept since the night after the concert, her copied cipher key in her father's hand, written as a puzzle for a girl of 13. She had carried it for luck. Now it might be evidence, if anyone would hear it. At 2 o'clock she heard carriage wheels below and male voices in the hall, not Ravensmere's, Petal's, broad and jovial. Dr. Mowbray's anxious murmur, Lady Larson's clear reply, "She is overexcited, better she not face a crowd unless guided." A harder voice answered, Mr. Finch, Ravensmere's solicitor, unmistakable in its legal dryness. "Madam, locking an adult gentlewoman in her bedchamber on the day of a financial vote is not guidance. It is actionable confinement." Silence. Then Lady Larson, silk over knives. "I deny your premise." Bolts shot back. The door opened to reveal a tableau fit for theatre. Lady Larson, pale with offended virtue, Petal flushed, Doctor, Mowbray clutching his hat, and behind them Finch with 2 clerks and a constable. "Miss Larson," Finch said, "do you wish to attend Hanover Square?" "Yes." "Freely?" "Yes." Lady Larson laughed softly. "Under ducal coaching, evidently." Finch did not look at her. "Then we depart now." In the hall, as Alexandra took her gloves, Lady Larson stepped close enough for only her to hear. "You think this is victory. Child, the only witness with any standing is dying. Your papers are ashes, and every man in that room owes me a favour. Speak all you like. They will clap for courage and sign against you." Alexandra met her gaze. "Then they will sign in daylight." Outside, the sky had turned the colour of tarnished pewter. Ravensmere's carriage waited at the curb, horses stamping in cold wind. Ravensmere stood by the open door, expression unreadable except for the pulse beating hard at his throat. As she set her foot on the step, a messenger came running from Hanover Square, breathless, coat unbuttoned. "For His Grace! Urgent! From Sir Julian Markham!" Ravensmere broke the seal while Alexandra watched. His face changed, not much, but enough. "What is it?" she asked. He folded the note once. "Markham writes that a new document has been produced at the Assembly. A marriage contract bearing your signature, witnessed, dated last night." Alexandra felt the world tilt and steady all at once. "I never signed any such thing." "I know." Ravensmere met her eyes. "But unless we can break it in that room, before they vote, they will treat it as consent." The church clock at the end of the square struck 3, each bell stroke a narrowing door. Ravensmere handed the note to Finch, climbed in after Alexandra, and rapped once on the roof. The carriage lurched forward toward Hanover Square, where a forged promise already waited on the table. The carriage lurched forward toward Hanover Square, where a forged promise already waited on the table. By the time they turned into the square, lamps had been lit against the bruised afternoon. Carriages stood 2 deep at the curb. Footmen stamped in the wind. Inside the townhouse hired for trustee meetings, voices carried through the vestibule in that brittle social tone that meant battle disguised as procedure. Finch handed Alexandra out first. Ravensmere followed, then stopped half a pace behind her and did not overtake. In the long assembly room, Sir Julian Markham sat at the head of a polished table beneath 3 gilt mirrors. Papers were stacked before him with military precision. Along either side sat trustees, 2 committee ladies, Mr. Petal with a thick portfolio, Dr. Mowbray, and Lady Larson in mourning lavender composed as carved stone. Every seat seemed occupied, every eye turned. Sir Julian rapped once for order. "Miss Larson has arrived. We proceed." Petal rose immediately, broad hand resting on a document. "Then the matter is simple. Here is Miss Larson's own consent to marriage and settlement witnessed last night. I request ratification and transfer authority as noticed." "May I see it?" Alexandra asked. Petal hesitated, then passed it down with theatrical reluctance. The paper was fresh, the signature a careful imitation of her hand. Careful, but wrong. Too deliberate on the first stroke. No pressure break before the final loop. Alexandra looked up. "This is forged." Lady Larson sighed softly. "Child, denial will not save you from your own impulsiveness." Alexandra turned to Sir Julian. "Before any vote, I request leave to read a letter in my father's hand, witnessed and sealed, regarding my trust and any marriage contract made under coercion." A murmur swept the room. Lady Larson's fan snapped shut. "You have no such letter," she said flatly. Alexandra reached into the inner seam of her bodice and drew out a narrow oilskin packet, creased from long concealment. She broke the old red wax with steady fingers. Inside lay one folded sheet, yellowed, bearing her father's compact script and 2 witness signatures in the margin. "I do," she said. Sir Julian extended his hand. She shook her head. "With respect, sir, I will read it myself." He studied her a moment, then nodded. "Read." Alexandra unfolded the page. Her own pulse sounded in her ears, but her voice came clear. "To my daughter, Alexandra Ann Larson. If this reaches you, it is because illness has prevented my speaking fully. The trust settled in your name is yours upon majority, not to be altered by guardian, widow, creditor, or husband-seeking intermediary. No marriage instrument touching your person or property shall be valid unless executed by your free consent before independent witnesses and marked in the family cipher as you were taught. If pressure is brought, present this to the trustees and to Mr. Haldane, who retains duplicate instrument. Edmund Larson, June 14th. She lowered the page. The room had gone very quiet. Lady Larson recovered first. "Convenient, a sentimental fabrication." Alexandra placed the letter on Sir Julian's blotter beside the alleged marriage contract. "My father's hand can be verified by any competent examiner. More immediately, he refers to the cipher requirement. Please look at the lower right margin of this forged contract." She tapped the empty corner. "There is no cipher mark." Petal barked a laugh. "No sane contract requires childish puzzles." "My father required it because he knew documents can be copied," Alexandra said, and held his gaze until he looked away. "I have used that cipher since I was 11. Dr. Mowbray cleared his throat. Sir Julian, this is exactly the excited reasoning I warned of. Alexandra turned on him. Did you examine me, Doctor? He blinked. I consulted with Lady Larson as to... Did you examine me? No. Then your warning is gossip in a waistcoat. Two trustees coughed into their hands. One almost smiled. Sir Julian's mouth twitched once and flattened. Dr. Mowbray's opinion is struck for lack of examination. Lady Larson leaned forward, eyes bright now with open fury. You mistake insolence for proof. Even if the contract were defective, her claims to this supposed trust rest on burnt books and hearsay from a dying clerk. My claims rest on arithmetic, Alexandra said, and on your own payments. She nodded to Finch, who passed her a tied bundle. She untied it and laid out copied columns in order, each sheet numbered. Here are household disbursements in your hand authorising fees to Hollis, clerk to Petal and Crowell. Here are corresponding transfers from accounts designated temporary guarantee. Here are the same amounts entering Petal and Crowell, then exiting to your private account through Westgate intermediaries. Petal slammed his palm on the table. Coincidence. Business. Business usually balances, Alexandra said. These do not, because each transfer was split by thirds to mask extraction from my trust principal. She wrote 3 numbers on a scrap, added them, and turned it for the table to see. You rounded every third disbursement upward by £2.7, repeatedly. Your habit, Mr. Petal. It appears in your shipping ledgers as well. I checked. He flushed crimson. By what right did you inspect my ledgers? By the right of a woman whose life you attempted to purchase. Sir Julian held out his hand. The calculations, she gave them. He read, then passed to the trustee on his right, who began silently re-adding with pursed lips. Lady Larson shifted tactics, her voice softened, trembling at the edges. Gentlemen, can you not see she has been coached, by whom need not be said? Her glance flicked toward Ravensmere. A powerful man entangles an impressionable girl, fills her head with conspiracies, then profits from our humiliation. Must we let this become a spectacle? All eyes moved to Ravensmere. He stood exactly where he had entered, behind Alexandra's chair, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. He said nothing. Alexandra answered for herself. If His Grace had coached me, he would not have advised private settlement this morning. I refused, because quiet theft remains theft. A rustle around the table. Sir Julian looked up sharply. He advised settlement? Yes. And you declined? Yes. Sir Julian sat back. Noted. Finch rose. I submit also a sworn deposition from Mr. Haldane, taken yesterday before 2 barristers, attesting signatures after June 14th were forged under Lady Larson's instruction and routed through Petal and Crowell. Lady Larson laughed, brittle. A dying old man's delirium. From the rear doorway came a thin voice. Delirium seldom chooses dates so exactly, madam. Heads turned. A hospital orderly stood there supporting Mr. Haldane, grey-faced and wrapped in blankets, a clerk at his side. He looked one breath from collapse and stubborn enough to spend that breath usefully. Alexandra half rose in shock. Mr. Haldane! He lifted a shaking hand. Sit, miss. Let me earn my sin. He looked at Sir Julian. I delayed years, no more. I witnessed Mr. Larson settle her trust. I later witnessed papers forged while he could not hold a pen. I signed none of them. Lady Larson threatened dismissal and prosecution. I was a coward. That is my part. Lady Larson stood abruptly. This is theatre. I refuse to be tried by servants and sentimentalists. Sir Julian struck the table with his gavel. Sit down, Lady Larson. For the first time she did not. Very well, she said, voice hard as glass. You want plain speaking. The girl had no prospects. The household had debts. Petal offered rescue. I arranged what prudent guardians arrange every day and call duty. If a signature was assisted, if accounts were adjusted, you burn the ledger, Alexandra said. Lady Larson's chin lifted. I burned old rubbish. You locked me in my room today to force inference of consent. I confined a hysterical dependent for her own safety. I'm not your dependent, Lady Larson smiled with all her teeth. Society disagrees. Alexandra stepped forward into the centre of the room. Then let society hear this clearly. I was accused of theft in public, sold in private, called unstable when I counted too well to be convenient, and told to be grateful for rescue from the men who manufactured my danger. I decline all of it. I claim my name, my father's trust, and my legal majority. If that is hysteria, gentlemen, it keeps excellent books. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Then the trustee with the pursed lips set down the calculation sheet. The figures are correct, he said quietly, and they are damning. Sir Julian stood. By authority of this chair, the proposed marriage settlement is void pending criminal inquiry for forgery. All transfer powers to Petal and Crowle are suspended. Lady Larson's control of contested assets is stayed immediately. Constable? The constable stepped forward. Lady Larson did not scream. She did something colder. She laughed once, low. You think this ends in a room full of men congratulating themselves for sudden conscience. Her eyes found Alexandra's. You are still a woman with a spoiled name. I can ruin what remains. Alexandra met her gaze without blinking. You already tried. They removed to the adjoining committee chamber because Sir Julian preferred ruin managed with minutes and signatures. Rain ticked at the windows. Candles smoked. Lady Larson sat at the far end of the table, gloved hands folded, every inch the injured widow, while Finch, Markham and 2 other solicitors drafted emergency orders. Petal paced and sweated near the hearth, muttering to his own counsel. Haldane had been carried back to his carriage, alive but fading. You are overreaching, Lady Larson said to the room at large. At worst there were procedural defects, civil irregularities, nothing criminal. Finch did not look up. Forgery of signatures, coercive confinement, conversion of trust funds, alleged, attested under oath with documentary corroboration. She turned to Alexandra with practised pity. If you proceed publicly, child, you will sit for depositions on every private detail of your life, every letter, every visit, every rumour about you and the Duke. Men in wigs will ask whether you encouraged him. Petal barked from the hearth, and I shall answer yes. Ravensmere moved, just enough that Petal took one involuntary step back. Alexandra spoke before Ravensmere could. Ask whatever you wish in court, Mr. Petal. I will answer in full. Lady Larson leaned in, dropping pretence. You cannot afford a full action. I can if stolen principal is frozen under court oversight and your houses are attached. For the first time a crack appeared. Attached? Finch slid a paper across to Markham. Draft order for immediate injunction against disposition of Lady Larson's Bath property and London plate pending restitution. Lady Larson snatched it, red, and her colour blanched. You cannot seize my dower. Not your dower, Finch said. Assets traceable to disputed transfers. Petal slammed his cane down. This is extortion. Sir Julian answered without heat. No, sir, it is accounting. Lady Larson threw the order onto the table. I will appeal. You may, Markham said, and while appealing you may answer why your physicians certified incapacity without examination, why your butler recorded instructions to deny Miss Larson visitors, and why this note— He lifted a folded slip with tongs, as if it were dirty. Was found in your clerk's book. Keep her from the meeting till signatures complete. In your hand. Her mouth tightened. Forged. Alexandra reached into her reticule and drew out one more paper. Then perhaps this is forged as well. It was a wage receipt from the charity school, endorsed to Larson House with Lady Larson's counter-signature and the annotation retain until compliant. Alexandra had taken it from the household waste basket 3 days earlier and kept it because numbers had taught her never to discard a motive. Lady Larson stared at it, then at Alexandra. Something like hatred, almost admiration, crossed her face. "You kept scraps," she said. "I kept everything," Alexandra replied. Petal's counsel whispered urgently in his ear. He swore under his breath, then said to the table, "Without prejudice, my client will consider withdrawal if granted indemnity from criminal referral." "No, indemnity," Alexandra said at once. Every man at the table looked at her as if remembering belatedly whose case this was. Lady Larson's composure frayed. "You vindictive little fool! I fed you, clothed you." "You build my own trust for both." "Because you were useless." Alexandra's voice did not rise. "I was useful enough to steal from." Lady Larson surged half out of her chair. "You would drag me through court, through newspapers. I am your father's widow." "You were?" Alexandra said. "And you used his sick room as an office." The words landed like a slap. Lady Larson sat very still. Sir Julian cleared his throat. "Here are the terms as currently drafted. Immediate restitution schedule under court supervision. Full accounting within 10 days. Public withdrawal of allegations against Miss Larson. Nullification of any marriage instrument with Petal and Crowell. Relocation from Larson House during proceedings. Refusal triggers civil filing tomorrow with criminal referral attached." Lady Larson's laugh was thin now. "Relocation! You mean exile!" "Bath," Finch said. "Your sister's address, if she'll have you." Her eyes closed once, briefly. When they opened, defiance remained, but calculation had returned. She looked at Petal, who refused her gaze. She looked at the door where a constable waited. Finally she reached for the pen. "I sign nothing that admits guilt," she said. Markham dipped the pen and set it before her. "You sign restitution. Courts can name guilt." Her signature scratched across 3 pages, each stroke harder than the last. When she finished, she pushed the pen away as if it burned. As she rose to leave, she paused beside Alexandra. "This city forgets theft," she said softly. "It never forgets a woman who makes men look foolish." Alexandra lifted her chin. "Then let them remember accurately." Lady Larson gave a small, ruinous smile and walked out under constable escort without looking back. The house emptied by degrees. Trustees first, then lawyers, then curious onlookers disappointed there had been no fainting. By the time Alexandra stepped into the darkening square, rain had stopped. The cobbles shone black under lamplight. She stood on the top step and found, to her surprise, that her knees were shaking. Ravensmere came to stand beside her, close enough to steady if asked, not touching unless invited. "You should sit before you fall." "I should probably laugh," she said, and heard the odd, breathless edge in her own voice. "Instead, I appear to be vibrating." "That is usually what happens after battle." She let out a short sound that might have been a laugh. "Was that battle?" He glanced toward the door where Petal had just emerged arguing with his counsel. "By London standards, yes. Minimal blood, extensive paperwork." She turned to him then, the adrenaline finally ebbing enough for everything else to rush in. The burned ledger, Haldane's grey face, Lady Larson's signature, her own voice carrying in a room that once would have silenced her with a glance. "I thought I would feel triumphant," she said. "I feel emptied and furious and absurdly hungry." Ravensmere's expression softened. "All excellent signs of life. A hospital carriage rattled past toward Holborn, and she remembered. Haldane! I've sent my surgeon. We'll have word tonight. She nodded. They stood in companionable quiet for a few breaths, while coachmen shouted and lamps hissed. At last she said, "You kept your promise." His brows drew slightly. "Which one?" "To stand where I asked, behind when I spoke, beside when attacked, not in front." He looked away for a moment, jaw working once. "I have not always done that well." "No," she said, "but you did today." Finch appeared at the curb with 2 wrapped packets. "Miss Larson, copies of all signed instruments. Keep them dry, keep them hidden, and if anyone requests just a look, refuse." He handed 1 packet to her, 1 to Ravensmere. "His Grace can hold duplicates." Alexandra tucked hers under her cloak as if it were a living thing. "Thank you, Mr. Finch." When he had gone, Ravensmere offered his arm. "My aunt ordered broth for you and likely for me by force. Will you come to Ravensmere House for an hour before returning?" She hesitated only a heartbeat. "Yes." As the carriage pulled away from Hanover Square, Alexandra looked back once at the lit windows where her name had been bartered and reclaimed in the same afternoon. The city beyond remained what it had always been, sharp, opportunistic, indifferent. Yet something fundamental had shifted inside her. Stillness was no longer surrender, it was choice. 3 evenings later, Lady Ravensmere contrived to be unexpectedly detained by a bishop, and left Alexandra alone in the dowager's small library with a fire and a tray of untouched tea. Rain tapped the panes again, gentler now. Alexandra stood by the mantel reading the final court notice. Interim restoration granted, independent trustees appointed, Petal claims struck pending action. The words felt unreal until she touched the seal. The door opened. Ravensmere entered, paused, as if unsure whether to advance, then shut the door behind him. "Haldane died at noon," he said quietly. She closed her eyes. "Was he in pain?" "Very little at the end. He asked that you have this." Ravensmere held out a tiny brass key. His dispatch box was found in a neighbour's shed, empty, but this was sewn into his cuff. Alexandra took it and wrapped her fingers around the cool metal. "He came to the assembly anyway. He said he was tired of dying in instalments." She laughed softly through sudden tears. "That sounds like him." For a while neither spoke. The fire settled with a small collapse of embers. At last Ravensmere said, "I owe you a larger truth than I have yet given." She looked up, wary but steady. "All right." He stood opposite her, hands ungloved, empty. "When Eleanor wrote to me, I answered with caution and process. I told myself prudence would protect her. It protected no one. Since then I have mistaken control for honour more times than I can count." His voice roughened slightly. "At Lady Densher's, I intervened because facts demanded it and because your case touched my seal. That is true. Also true, the moment you looked at me after, furious, humiliated, refusing to thank me for being merely decent, I began wanting your good opinion more than I wanted comfort." Alexandra's breath caught, almost imperceptibly. He went on, as if, once started, he could not permit himself retreat. "I admired your mind before I admitted your courage. I feared for you before I trusted you. I wanted to remove obstacles for you and had to be taught not to remove your agency with them. I am still learning." He met her eyes fully. "I love you, not as rescue, not as recompense, not because scandal welded our names in papers. Because when pressure came, you chose accuracy over ease and truth over safety. And because, in your presence, I am less inclined to lie to myself." The room seemed very still. Alexandra set the court notice down with deliberate care. I have been so long in rooms where affection was leverage that I don't always know what to do with plain declarations." "Nor do I," he said. "This is my first successful attempt." She smiled despite herself, then sobered. "If I said yes to anything between us, I would need terms." "Name them." "No benevolent management. No decisions made about my life before I enter the room. No treating my work as an ornament. If we disagree, we do it aloud, not through solicitors in adjacent chambers." A flicker of real humour touched his face. "You drive hard bargains." "I learned from experts." He took one step nearer. "Agreed. On all counts." She studied him for a long moment, seeing the restraint and the weariness and the stubbornness that matched her own in unnerving ways. "There is one more term," she said softly. "Do not ask me because you feel responsible." "I am responsible for many things," he said. "Not for loving you. That happened without permission." The last of her guardedness gave way then, not dramatically, but like a knot loosening. "All right," she whispered. He drew breath, as if steadying himself for battle more frightening than Hanover Square. "Alexandra Larson, will you marry me? I offer no poetry. I offer my name, my house, my imperfect character, and every day of whatever years I have, with room for your ledgers on any table you choose." She laughed once, a surprised sound edged with tears. "That is somehow exactly romantic enough." "And your answer?" "Yes." She lifted her chin, eyes bright. "I will marry you, not because you spoke for me once in public, because afterward you learned when not to." Something in his expression broke open. Relief, wonder, joy he had no practice hiding. He reached for her slowly, giving her time to refuse. She did not. His hands came to rest lightly at her waist, hers on his coat, and when he kissed her, it was careful at first, then fierce, with all the words he had kept banked too long. A discreet cough sounded from the doorway. Lady Ravensmere stood there with a candlestick and the triumphant expression of a general whose campaign had succeeded. "Excellent," she said. "Now that the Republic has been founded, shall I tell the cook to send up the good claret?" On a bright morning in June, Alexandra sat at a long table in what had once been Ravensmere's forbidding estate office, now cluttered with school prospectuses, trust reports, and 3 chipped cups no one had removed because they were in active use. Across from her, Miss Weatherby read from a list. 52 new volumes arrived from the printer. "The girls want astronomy first, naturally." "Of course they do," Alexandra said, signing a disbursement. "Give them the stars before sermons, or they'll never forgive us." At the side desk, Ravensmere reviewed tenant petitions with his steward. He looked up as she passed him a ledger. "Column 3 doesn't reconcile." "It does if you stop rounding sheep as though they were cannon," she said. His steward choked on a laugh and pretended to cough. There had been a wedding, small and unadorned, in Lady Ravensmere's parish church. No glittering crush, no strategic guest list, only those they trusted and those too stubborn to disapprove quietly. Petal had attempted one final petition. The court dismissed it with costs. Dr. Mowbray sent a note claiming illness and left for the country. Lady Larson departed for Bath under legal cloud and social frost. Her calls returned by almost no one. On this morning a footman brought in the post. Among the letters lay one with Bath postmark and Lady Larson's unmistakable hand. Alexandra turned it over, then set it unopened into the fire. Ravensmere watched, said nothing, and returned to his papers. At noon, Lady Ravensmere swept in, without knocking, hat askew, eyes sharp. "I have just informed a viscountess that arithmetic is not unfeminine and she may quote me. Also, your hospital library accounts are being copied by 2 other committees. Scandal does occasionally improve standards." She kissed Alexandra's cheek, clapped her nephew on the shoulder, and stole his biscuit. In the afternoon, when work was done, Alexandra crossed to the breakfast room, a room larger and brighter than Lady Larson's old stage of humiliations, with open windows and plain flowers in a jug. Tea waited. So did silence of a different sort, not imposed, not fearful, simply shared. Ravensmere poured and handed her a cup first. She took it, warm porcelain against her palm, and for one brief second remembered another room, another table, blood and iron on her tongue while laughter went on around her. No blood now, only tea, sunlight, and ink on her fingers. She opened the daybook, drew a clean line down the margin, and began the next column.